I'm Eric Parker. This morning on CT'23, they've been happening across the state, and the most recent incident in Groton early last week turned deadly. We're talking about dirt bikes, motorcycles, ATVs, even cars jamming up local roads and highways. Groton's police chief is here to talk about his concerns. And on this Labor Day weekend, we're looking at the important labor movements in Connecticut, the prospect of 4-day work weeks, and the role essential workers played during the pandemic. And in our Sunday Spotlight, more than a decade after leaving campus, Justin McManus, who played tuba in the Yukon Marching Band as a student, is now back in stores as the leader of the band. He'll be telling us about his return. It's all ahead this Sunday, September the 3rd. CT'23 starts right now.
From Channel 3, CT'23 with Eric Parker.
Good morning, and thank you for being with us. We begin our program looking at those incidents of street takeovers and street gatherings of ATVs, motorcycles, dirt bikes, and cars. They've been clogging up some Connecticut roadways and highways, putting people in danger. We've seen a bunch of them unfold over the past several months, and this past Monday, one turned deadly in the town of Groton. Groton Police Chief Louis Fusaro is here in studio to talk about what happened in his town and about the concerns around the state. Chief, thank you so much for being with us. I just want to start with this. All this intro that I just gave to the story was street takeover. You haven't used that term in Groton, though it looks familiar. Why are you staying away from that term?
Well, I think we've seen these things across the state of Connecticut. In some communities, it's been large groups, dozens, maybe even more, ATVs, dirt bikes, motorcycles, go to an intersection, go to an area of street where they just take it over and dominate it. In this particular case, it was a group of motorists, ATVs, dirt bikes, at night, 9:30, going up and down roadways in our town. So they didn't dominate a particular area of roadway other than driving recklessly, going in and out of cars. There's been reports earlier in the evening about encountering police officers, trying to prompt them into pursuits. That didn't happen right before this, but a little bit different. I've drawn a little bit of a distinction.
Interesting, you said they were trying to prompt police officers into pursuits. The department's press release said bait officers into pursuit, and I caught that and thought, that's kind of what they're doing. Is they have such a disregard for the law that they're even trying to bait officers into pursuit, and officers can't pursue, right? Is that part of the issue here?
Well, officers can pursue, but very finite circumstances that allow officers under the statewide police pursuit policy in order to engage in pursuit. And quite frankly, it's a risky business when an officer engages in pursuit. It's risky to them, to the public, to the offender that they're trying to apprehend. So we try to manage that risk versus the reward of capturing that person. So we manage that very, very delicately. But it is a source of frustration when officers are out on patrol. And that particular night at this incident, one of the first arriving officers told me at the scene, he says, you know, Chief, earlier in the night, I see groups of people, probably the same guys, going around on dirt bikes, ATVs, no headlights. They're obviously driving reckless. They're trying to get police officers to chase after them, and they have no regard for their own safety. They certainly don't care about the safety of other motorists, and they're a hazard universally, and it's a huge problem for us to enforce. We want to enforce it. We have a job to do. But it's problematic in so many different ways.
We have some videos, some of the other street takeovers that have been in the news around the state of Connecticut. And you mentioned some of the numbers in those cases have been larger as far as the number of motorcycles, ATVs involved in these incidents. But you know, the one in your town was deadly. There have been injuries in some of these others. This is West Haven we're looking at right now. I saw that was back in August. Back in May, there was one in Tolland. A dispatcher said to the caller to 911, "We just don't have the manpower to do anything. We know it's out there," because you're facing 100 people
Sure.
or 50 people. So you're the leader of a police department. It must be frustrating to say this is happening in my town and there's not much I can do.
Yeah, well, like I said, we have a job to do, so we're trying to do things about it, but we want to do it safely for not just for them, right? Because these are people that don't have much regard for their own safety. What I saw in the video clip that you just had here is they're not really driving at a high rate of speed. That's not what we had the other night. The other night we had, in our estimations, 9 to 12 motorcycles and ATV, high rate of speed, going down Route 12, well-traveled. For those that are familiar with Groton, it's south of the submarine base. It's on a commercial strip, going through intersections, clearly not obeying the speed limits, doing wheelies in the middle of the street, and that's what led to this collision. That's what led, you know, there was a red light. They disregarded it, went through at a high rate of speed, causing the death to a 24-year-old woman.
Well, a 24-year-old woman who died there at the scene, and you talked about the disregard for the law. The other participants in this, or whatever you want to term them, they didn't care for the woman who was injured. They took the bike and got out of there. So does that speak to what's happening here and just the disregard for life?
Yeah, the callousness I see with that is, presumably these are friends, associates, many of whom we have not yet identified because they're not on bikes that have license plates. They're hard to, some of them may be stolen, maybe they're certainly not registered, not insured. They're not obeying any of the laws that we've already put in place. But rather than caring for the people that are down there bleeding, clearly life-threatening injuries, they had the wherewithal to take one of the vehicles, or take the bike that was involved and leave with it. Took the evidence from the scene. So I find that to be callous, and I think that's pretty disturbing.
So do you have the tools in your tool belt to deal with this? What can you do to stop these? What can you and other chiefs do? Do you need new laws? What can happen?
Well, the way I look at it, I think it's a this four-legged stool almost, right? We're definitely a part of the solution. Police has to be, utilizing the tactics and techniques that we use in law enforcement to make things right and to do things safely. Secondly, the courts have a role to play. So when we're making an arrest for this, we're hoping that they be prosecuted, maybe some vehicles seized, maybe there's some opportunity for the legislature as that third stool to say, hey, listen, there are things that there's laws in place right now that aren't being obeyed, but yet maybe some of the penalties need to be stiffer, and we need to make sure that those penalties are levied against these violators because they are causing death. And finally, it's a community problem, right? People that are aware of this stuff happening and can influence those people that decide to do this to not do it, whether it's parents, siblings, wives, husbands, whatever the case may be. This is not appropriate behavior. They're creating a threat and a risk not just to themselves but to other people because, as I've described this incident, there were other people involved. There was a lady who was obeying the laws of the road, the rules of the road, that was hit. She's got to live with this. She was transported to the hospital. There's families that are impacted by this. We're dedicating a lot of resources to investigate it. So it's a multi-pronged approach. And as far as laws, listen, this group isn't obeying the laws that are already on the books. So when we do make arrests, when we do bring these cases to prosecution, we hope that they, receive appropriate sentences if that's the will of the court, and we hope it is. I
know certainly in your role you talk to a lot of police officers. I have friends who are police officers, and just anecdotally hearing about this, that police accountability bill that got so much publicity when it was first passed and dealing with qualified immunity. Do you believe that plays into maybe reluctance in some way to deal with these situations? I think police officers are frustrated, many of whom express that to me personally. I understand what they're saying, that some things that were part of that bill, I think we wholeheartedly supported, meeting police chiefs and law enforcement. We're all about professionalism, making sure that we represent ourselves in the best way possible. There are things that should not have happened that happened, which clearly we were not happy about in law enforcement. However, some of the things that restrict our ability to enforce the law and maybe have us call into question our ability to enforce the law, that split-second decision an officer has to make out there, it's easy to criticize that after the fact, right? But there are officers that say, hey, listen, I'm concerned about this when the stakes for them have risen. Training we've been in favor of, but when an officer sees the potential penalties or consequences for them maybe being much more consequential to them personally, and then meanwhile we see that there's another balancing act where some of the criminals aren't really getting put in jail for as long as we would expect. The penalties for the cops seem to be higher, and conversely, maybe the consequences for others aren't as grave as they were once before. We only have about 30 seconds left, but we've seen this obviously in Groton, Meriden, Tolland, Vernon. So anywhere around the state, someone could be at an intersection. In your case, it was more just reckless driving, like you said, but some of those videos we saw, hundreds of ATVs or dozens of ATVs crowding up an intersection. What's the advice if one of our viewers finds himself in the middle of these situations? Yeah, try to avoid them, first of all. If you see him get out of the way, try to find a parking lot. Go, if you are totally unable to leave it, just pull over to the side, get out of the way, don't get out of your car, don't try and stop them. That's only going to pose a risk to you. Report it, call 911 if you need to. Certainly don't get in the middle of it. Try to avoid it. But if you're just pinned in, you can't do anything else, stay in your car. Make sure you should already have your seatbelt on, but just be safe and don't let anybody get out. Well, and as you said, in your town, it was a woman taking what appears to have been a legal turn who got T-boned by someone running a red light, and she has to live with that. A young lady lost her life, so it's serious situations. Chief Fusaro, we appreciate you being with us here on the show. Hopefully we'll have you back again. Well, thanks for having me. All right. Coming up later in our program, it's time to strike up the band. The new Yukon marching band director joins us to talk about his return to Connecticut and his role in getting Yukon fans pumped up as the football season starts. And up next, looking at some of the important Labor Day movements in Connecticut on this Labor Day weekend. We'll be right back.